Okay, do we have everybody in? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Goodfellow. I'm the Director of Public Art in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. And in that capacity, I'm Director of the Boston Art Commission. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the July meeting of the Boston Art Commission. As background, the Boston Art Commission, staffed by the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, is an independent board composed of 9, currently 8 appointed art and design professionals that holds public meetings to review and vote on matters concerning the city's art collection. Meetings are generally held the second Tuesday of each month to review current public art projects cited on or proposed for the City of Boston property. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this meeting virtually. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the Boston Art Commission, the public may access this meeting through telephone and video conferencing. Sorry, forgot to put my headphones on. I am joined by the Boston Art Commission staff, working within the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, Sarah Rodrigo, Public Art Project Manager, Tricia Gilrain, Collections Manager, and Christina Carroll, Communications Director, will be helping to facilitate this meeting. I will now hand over to Chair Mark Pasnick and Vice Chair Aqua Holmes, who will call the meeting to order and go over some further instruction.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, everyone. I'm calling this public hearing to order at 4:06 p.m. Today, the Commission will be holding a public meeting. Next slide, please. I will now take the roll call of commissioners to confirm a quorum. After I state your name, commissioners, please say here. Aqua Holmes. Aqua, unmute yourself.
Here, I apologize.
Camilo Alvarez.
Here.
Michael Canizzo.
Here.
Cara Elliott Ortega.
Here.
George Fifield.
Here.
Robert Freeman.
Here.
Lisa Tung.
Here.
Okay, and so we have an official quorum. Next slide, please. The Commission and staff wish to provide some instruction on using this platform effectively to offer questions and comments, which will occur later in the meeting. This list that you see in front of you is the way that you can make comments as a member of the public. We'll be making time for that later in the meeting, but as with regular BAC meetings, project partners and members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment on items the Commission will vote on. After presentations and commissioners clarifying questions, the chair and vice chair will invite public comment. Please remember to keep your comments on topic and 2 minutes or less. More detailed instruction will be provided later in the meeting by Karen. We will be following the publicly posted agenda, which you see in the next slide. Here you see as publicly posted, which will begin with the director's report in part 2, followed by the discussion of the Commission on the next steps for Emancipation Group in part 3. Public testimony may be offered at that time. We have 2 updates to our publicly posted agenda. The first is that Karen will present new information on some conservation work related to a piece in the collection. And second, we have postponed the presentation of the Gratitude Bridge until next month. Now we will take a minute to review the meeting minutes from the previous 3 public meetings in June. That's June 9th, June 25th, and June 30th. I open up to any comments from commissioners for modifications or edits to the minutes as sent to you. And if I do not hear any, we can have a motion to accept the minutes. Are there any comments from commissioners? Okay, if not, could I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I move to accept the minutes.
I second that.
Okay, and who seconded?
Aqua.
Oh, Aqua, thank you. And now I'll read off a list of names and please say yay or nay. Aqua Holmes.
Yay. Yay.
Camilo Alvarez.
Yay.
Michael Canizzo.
Yes.
Cara Elliott Ortega.
Yes.
George Fifield.
Yes.
Robert Freeman.
Yes.
And Lisa Tung.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Now we will have Karen Goodfellow give her director's report. Karen?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. So we're going to start out to preface this discussion. Next slide, please. Sorry. To preface this discussion, I'll say that if there's any discussion amongst the commissioners, Chair Mark Pasick will be recusing himself, and Vice Chair Igwa Holmes will be taking over as chair if necessary. But this is really just an update that at the June 9th meeting of the Boston Art Commission, the commission voted to grant the BAC director the authority to enter into an MOU that recognizes the fundraising of $1 million by the Boston Foundation for the Embrace. The Art Commission has stated some additional questions that are related, including but not limited to the structure of the fund, the relationship between the artwork and maintenance plan, and how it's covered intellectual property, among others. Next slide. Yep, thank you. The MOU was edited to clarify the language to reflect the BAC's vote and was shared with the Boston Foundation by Corporation Counsel, and I believe we are waiting for their response. On transformative public art. Next slide. Transformative artists have been hosting online events and implementing projects throughout June and early July. As you might remember, 24 projects were selected as part of this year's Transformative Public Art Program. And in addition, 2 murals that were funded last year through the program will be completed this summer. You can see one of those in here, and the other one has yet to begin. We released a call to artists for the second round of the program in April 2020. This year, we're looking for artworks that respond to COVID-19 and provide creative approaches to public connections and community rituals at a time where we're all feeling disoriented and some sense of insecurity. And in this way, the projects are taking place with social distance in mind, and many are happening virtually. 4 examples of the work are shown here. Rob Pro-Black Gibbs installed Breathe Life, I think it's 2, funded with the grant from Transformative Program and also in collaboration with the Museum of Fine Arts, and that's at Madison Park High School. Hip Story hosted 2 very successful live streams, and there's a graphic here on the lower middle showing the results of their events. And we have some upcoming events with Lani Asuncion performing Biosounds at the BPL on July 24th, which will be live streamed. We can share the link in the chat maybe for anyone who's interested. And Kajiaso Studios hosted a Tenabata Star Festival, a Japanese tradition dating back to 755 event, both in person at Symphony Park and online on July 7th. And more links to projects can be found on the website shown in the lower right. We have profiles created for all the different projects that we funded. So that's been a nice opportunity for us to expand our conception of public art, our concept of public art at this time. We have some very brief updates on a few contracts and calls to artists. So at the Vine Street BCYF, the Interior Public Art Commission contract was signed by artist Destiny Palmer, and we don't see her work here, but it's really beautiful, brightly colored work that we'll be very excited to bring to this community center. So that is it on that. And then further administrative update, we have, if we skip forward a couple of slides, just another update that we still have not been able to have the pending nominations to the Art Commission confirmed by the City Council. We're continuing to follow up with them. We know that they're managing a lot of different business, but we will continue to work toward getting these commissioners confirmed. Additionally, we want to go over an open meeting law complaint we received, which you were all sent by email. Under the law, the commission is required to review the details of the complaint. These are the steps for compliance with the open meeting law. Required steps are that the commission must respond within 10 business days, absent an extension. The commission is to review the details of the complaint, which is what we're doing here today. The commission investigates through either one of these methods. By delegating to council, the commission must vote to authorize that delegation. The BAC can respond as a commission to the complainant, and the BAC chair can also request an extension of 10 business days within which the BAC must respond to gather this information. and we must respond to the complainant and copy the AG's office. So on July 1st, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture received an open meeting law complaint, and the complaint alleges non-compliance of open meeting law as it relates to posting of the notice and agenda, lack of promotion for a survey developed by the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture to gather public opinion regarding the Emancipation Group. The complainant addressed the complainant addressed two pieces of the open meeting law. One saying that we didn't notice the meeting correctly, and another that appears more related to how we disseminate information. So really only that first one is related to the open meeting law. The criticism of the survey is more about our performance. This is the text of the complaint as submitted. I believe the commission violated open meeting rules by not allowing adequate time for notifying the public of the meeting regarding the Emancipation Statute. Since it clearly states on their website that the commission meets the first Tuesday of the month, there is no record of when the notice was made on the website, when they posted the meeting, and circumstances surrounding the change, only that the meeting occurred. There's also reference to a polling survey that was not widely posted and noticed, used as a tool to determine public opinion. These acts violate Mr. Walsh's policy he has espoused regarding government transparency. The complainant did not specify which meeting this was in response to. Here we have both dates for the two meetings regarding Emancipation Group. And again, it's unclear which meeting the complainant is referring to, so we are sharing both with you. As you all know, when we're creating our agendas, we need to have them posted 48 hours before the start of the meeting, and those are business hours. So we have to usually get those in sometime the week before our meeting. Sometimes we get in well in advance of that and we have updates, but as you can see here, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture staff worked with the City Clerk's office to remain in compliance with the meetings held on June 25th and June 30th with the following schedule: that on June 19th, the June 30th, 5 p.m. Meeting was noticed with an agenda that included the Emancipation Group, which is the topic that we needed to have for discussion. And on June 23rd, the June 25th, 6 p.m. meeting was published with an agenda that included the Emancipation Group as the topic. Because we appropriately posted notice for both meetings, we can respond to the complainant that we sent notices for both on these specific days. Additionally, we have this public promotion that was questioned about whether or not we shared the survey. And this is just to give you a sense of how the information was disseminated around the meetings in the survey, in addition to what is required by law. And finally, we're going to return to something I listed out to you before, which are your options for next steps. So basically, you can decide, the commission can decide how to investigate this. So you can either ask Nyla Freeman, our corporation counsel, to manage it. You can decide to do so yourself, or you can ask for an extension. I think we have Nyla in the meeting in case you have questions, but with that, I will turn to you to let us know how you would like to manage this.
Thank you, Karen. We can open it up for commissioner comments here, but from what I see, we have complied with the open meeting law. However, it seems to me that it would be worthwhile having our council review that and to proceed by asking the council to review our process. How do other commissioners feel here?
I agree with that, Mark. I think that our council will be the best person to take a look at this and see if there's any merit at all that we need to respond further to.
I would concur as well.
I'm in agreement as well.
Mark, I'm in agreement also.
Okay, great. I think maybe it sounds like we have consensus here, but it sounds like we also need a formal vote. So could someone make a motion?
I make a motion that we defer this issue to our council.
I second that.
Thank you very much. And then I guess we should have each member say yes, that they agree with that motion. George?
Yes.
I'm not seeing everybody. So, Robert,
Yes.
Cara,
Yes.
Camilo,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Aqua,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
and did I get everybody? And I'm a yes as well. Okay, so we'll refer this to our corporate counsel, or to our counsel, Nyla, to further investigate. Aaron, do you need anything else from us?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So I'm also updating you on some emails that were sent to the Art Commission following the June 30th meeting. Following the meeting, the Art Commission had designed together public testimony for the Emancipation Group. The Art Commission received emails from the public. So this was after the actual decision, after the vote. We received 105 emails and messages following the Commission's June 30th meeting and subsequent vote. 25 or so of these emails included harassing language. Staff is responding to emails with information about the public process that was taken to gather public testimony regarding the Emancipation Group and inviting them to sign up for our newsletter and to visit the website Public Art Under Review, where we are continuing to share information so that people understand the vote. I think a lot of people are seeing headlines and are a little bit confused about the reasoning that the Commission had.
I read them all, and I would say that some were pretty difficult, harassing language being used to personally attack commissioners. And I don't know if any of them deserve to be referred to anyone else for that kind of threatening language that we received. Most of them were quite, I think, of value, but there were some that I thought perhaps we should have somebody from the city review them.
Okay. So we've been tracking them all, and we can share those and continue that conversation internally about how we will manage that.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to be talking about some of the existing public art. We're going to start out just talking briefly about conservation and preservation. We're going to talk about Matthew Hoffman's May This Never End, which is in Alston. It's a piece by Chicago-based artist Matthew Hoffman and was originally commissioned by the Rose County Greenway, and it's been vandalized repeatedly in the past and over the past few months. Next slide, please. Here you can see the original installation on the Greenway. The artwork was 4 feet by 312 feet long and made of bright yellow high-density polyethylene, and it was originally exhibited on a fence between North and Clinton Streets in 2016, and it was deinstalled in May of 2017. The artwork was reinstalled on the fence along the south side of Lincoln Street between Franklin and Eric Road, and currently it's on a fence in the Mass Turnpike Authority property. The work was abbreviated from 312 to 162 feet, and the artist was consulted as these changes were made. Here we have a couple examples of vandalism that's been happening. So there's been some rearranging of the letters. This is from last May, and I know we talked to you about this. I can't remember which meeting we brought this to you, but the letters had been rearranged and there'd been some writing on them. And so we've been pretty consistently aware that this new location for the piece hasn't been as successful as we had hoped in terms of its security and reception. And the photograph on the left is from earlier in May 2020, and the one on the right was just the other day. The letters have been rearranged. At first they were rearranged, I think it said rats are people too. And the second one was arranged to say Black Lives Matter. The rearrangement was something that we had been notifying the artist of. Again, we had brought this to you, and we've been already working with the conservator to talk about, removing it regarding its deinstallation and storage. And I think it is likely that we'll continue to go forward with that. There's been recent press because the Black Lives Matter rearrangement was then vandalized more and also cleaned by the community more. But I will say the materials, as you know, this was a temporary installation to start. It wasn't designed to be a permanent installation and was withstanding the continued paint addition and removal very well, as you can see in the image on the right. I don't know if anyone has any updates on that, but we're going to continue as we had updated you before, that we'll just be deinstalling and storing it and taking it into consideration, and can bring it to you again in the future. Okay, all right. And then we have the Emancipation Group. So next slide. On this slide, you will see the Emancipation Group, which was installed in Park Square in 1879. The sculpture is by Thomas Ball, but it is a bronze recasting of an original artwork that is currently in Washington, D.C. I'll be providing a brief update on the Emancipation Group now, and there will be a discussion later in the meeting when the public can make testimony should they wish. The Emancipation Group has been criticized since its installation, primarily for its visual representation of Archer Alexander as the passive recipient of Lincoln's gift of freedom. Many also feel that it inaccurately implies that one person is solely responsible for ending slavery, presenting Lincoln as a paternalistic white savior and obscuring his complex history. The BAC received repeated calls for its removals over much time, and that included a recent petition that garnered many thousands of signatures. And here is just a brief timeline to give folks a better idea of what our process has been like. I think, you know, in reading through a lot of the letters we're getting, we are again seeing that people don't really understand that this has been a long, thoughtful process by the Art Commission. So we just wanted to share a little bit of context and to provide a more comprehensive background on the timeline associated with the Commission's considerations of Emancipation Group. So here you'll find some key dates from the past few years leading up to June's meeting for public testimony and the decision of the Art Commission to remove and recontextualize the bronze statue to a new setting. So you can read through these, but you can see, we think it was...
Maybe you could just highlight a few, because I do think it's a
Sure.
common perception that we were only responding to a petition, but this has been a process that dated back much longer than that.
Yeah, and so as I mentioned, I think a lot of people are reading headlines or really only hearing verbally about the Commission's decisions. So I think if anyone attended our meetings, they would have a better sense of this. But back in the summer, we think it was of 2016, we were just talking about whether we had the date right. The Art Commission drafted a curatorial vision. And so that's been really guiding our work over the past few years. In the summer of 2018, in the context of national discussion around Confederate monuments, Boston University's PhD student and Center for the Humanities Mayor's Office graduate summer intern, Eva Mesicek, is commissioned to research other cities and review Boston's collection on July 7th. She gave a briefing to our commission on research about monuments at the July public meeting, and she presents an opportunity for change discussing monuments in Boston and beyond. And that's a document that we have shared publicly and can be found on our website. And in that report, Eva highlighted 6 and mentioned another 2 pieces of ours that we should really be spending time looking at. And she also shared the way other cities are handling their dialogues and decisions around controversial and in particular racist monuments. In the summer of 2019, research process begins for collections database with the intent to create a comprehensive survey of Boston public art and provide education through an online searchable interface and interactive map. In September 2019, we developed a new collections policy and created and had that curatorial vision approved as part of that policy document at our September meeting. And in November 2019, our procurement process began for the collection database. And just at our last formal, our last normal meeting, June 9th, 2020, we returned to the report from 2018, An Opportunity for Change, discussing monuments in Boston. And again, looking at what was happening nationally. So we returned to the document that we had, and we discussed next steps we would want to have at our next meeting, including actionable steps to approach solutions for the monuments we discussed. And on June 23rd, we released a survey which garnered 645 responses from the public related to Emancipation Group. We also received, I think, 160 or so emails, and I think 32 people gave public testimony at over 5 hours of public meeting on Emancipation Group. Okay, next slide. The timeline of events associated with the Emancipation Group continued. We posted information regarding public art under review on the city's website. And on June 25th, we had that first public meeting of the Boston Art Commission to gather public testimony, and on June 30th, we had our second meeting, both of which were publicly noticed and shared. And so we also identified that we would be moving into a second phase where we would be creating some signage to be installed at the Emancipation Group site, both temporary and later permanent. And at today's meeting, we'll be discussing next steps, and written testimony will continue to be shared with the Art Commission as we receive it. So this just goes over a little bit more details about the meetings that we had. If anyone is curious, at our June 9th meeting, we went over the statement that the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture put out to make Boston a more equitable city. And that it was in that framing that we brought the report back to conversation. And then we had the two meetings where we had public testimony. On this slide, you'll see the numbers of respondents to the survey, the call for written testimony, and the number of individuals who offered testimony at the June 25th and 30th meeting. Next slide. The vote that was taken on June 30th is written here. The Art Commission voted unanimously to remove the bronze figurative elements of Emancipation Group pending the following: engagement of an art conservator to document, recommend how the bronze statue is removed, and supervise its removal and placement into temporary storage. Commissioning of detailed documentation of the artwork into Boston Art Commission archives, which may include photography of the statue in situ, drawings, and a 3D scan, as well as the history of the piece and the process that the Boston Art Commission took in order to make this decision. Creation of a public event that will acknowledge the statue's history and inform the public. Initiation of a process to determine how to recontextualize the existing statue in a new publicly accessible setting, and addition of temporary signage to the site to interpret the statue prior to its removal, and permanent signage after the removal. Following the vote, the Art Commission staff has been working to initiate pending items from the vote to remove the bronze figurative elements of the Emancipation Group. We've been working with conservators to ask about documentation and temporary storage, and we are expecting the quotes this week. So we have been engaging conservators and are waiting to get those responses. We have been drafting text, and I think we have a draft of that to share with you today. So we've been, text has been created and signs are going into print in the coming days for temporary signage, and a process for creating permanent signage will follow. In terms of the event, there's an intention to create a subcommittee on that topic that we can return to. And recontextualization research is being conducted regarding a new publicly accessible site to recontextualize the monument. And we're going to be looking for ways for you to make suggestions on the website. So we'll be putting up a form for suggestions to be added to at the Public Art and Review site. And I think this is not the latest draft of the temporary signage. We just got this, and I think we've gotten another one more recently, but this has some of the draft, the language that we've been working on, and we're just trying to figure out the best way to share that with the public. So I know there's a slightly edited version, but if you guys have any concerns about the way it's presented now, I know we've been talking about whether or not the text is too tight for the size it's on. Does it need to be on more than one sign? So we asked the designer to consider that and to get us a couple different options. But this gives you some sense of the aesthetic that we're working with right now.
Are they, Karen? How big are they going to be printed?
We can return to it, but we had initially been thinking 24 by 36. So well, we can see if that works. If we do it bigger, it might be a little bit more cumbersome on the site. And we can think about whether it makes sense to have like a couple different signs to hold the information and make sure it's legible. On this right now, I know we're adding in another quotation by Frederick Douglass as well, which you don't see in this version yet.
Yeah, I do. My first reaction is definitely that it just feels like a wall of text.
Yeah.
So I think if there's ways we can play with that, that would be great.
Same here.
Yeah, and I was going to say also the white type on a dark background.
Yeah.
Lessen the readability. It's nice. It's nice for a design element, but it doesn't really invite reading. And since there is so much text,
Yeah.
I'm curious if we can switch that.
Well, you can see the black text on the white background and the bottom part is much easier to read then.
Yeah, so
Okay.
am I being heard as well? Am I being heard as well?
Going to be.
I think we have some people who don't realize they're not muted. Okay, so I can share that feedback, and we'll be continue to work on this, and we hope to have that up very soon. But we are working on that.
Karen, how many signs?
I believe I'm unmuted now, correct? I'm unmuted now, correct?
No, you're not. Thank you. Now you are. I think, yeah.
What was the question?
He asked, was he muted?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so how many signs? I think we were thinking a few on the site. I can't remember. Sarah, do you remember what the number was?
Sorry. I think we were looking at 3 to 4, depending on the placement. It's not a large park, but we want to kind of address all the different angles of approach. So a minimum of 3, possibly 4.
Right. So if we end up breaking it up, it would still be 3 to 4 locations with text. We just have to figure out the best way to sort of get them in there. Okay, next slide, please. And here you can see just that we're also taking the same text and putting it up on the website. We've been working with Christina to sort of take the language that we had developed from the signage, and she made it more appropriate for the website. And that's going up on there too. And that is the place where, should we want to, as we put someplace where people can make public comment and suggestions to us, we can have it hosted here. And we're in the process of working on that. Okay. So, and this is just giving you an idea of the other public dialogue we've had to date, and that we do intend to continue this kind of public dialogue around this project as we move forward. Understanding the commission made a decision, but as they weigh information, they are still taking in public dialogue and comment, and there will be a time during this meeting for people to make public comment as well. And just very briefly, just following up, there are 5 existing, other than the Emancipation Group, which we've already started looking into. There are 5 other works that we're looking at. A report commissioned by the Art Commission in 2018, which we went over, identified 5 other monuments that have yet to be addressed, but should continue to be reviewed and discussed in the future under a consistent process. And these monuments are what you see here: the Founders Memorial, the Christopher Columbus Monument, the Boston Commons Tablet, Samuel Morrison, and Francis Parkman Memorial. The John Endicott Monument and the Irish Famine Commemoration were also listed in the report. When we had gone over these at our June 9th meeting, and this is before the vandalism of the Christopher Columbus piece and the petition for Emancipation Group, the commission had outlined some broad approaches to the public art that we had under review, and the commissioner suggested the following. Can we get the next slide, please? So this was before we had sort of our special meetings around Emancipation Group, the discussion that we had about how we wanted to address sort of broadly looking at the collection. And I just wanted to return to this and as we think about our next steps going forward. But what you had been thinking about before was addressing the current statistics of representations within the city's collection and how they may fail to address the current culture and population. And we're looking into doing that and sharing that with you. We also talked about reframing certain monuments through interpretive panels or other interventions, and we're certainly trying to do that right now. developing signage for Emancipation Group, but we should be looking at it for the other pieces as well. We talked about developing multiple strategies rather than a blanket solution to resolve the issue. We talked about a call to address certain monuments in particular. We talked about developing action items for a set of monuments. We talked about investigating the public dialogue and community engagement that should happen, and while the staff is case building. And we also talked about commissioning artists to remove certain monuments in a way that is artistic and educational. So I'm not exactly sure what remove in that case meant, but we talked about using the artist residency program as something. I think it might mean to reinterpret, not to remove.
I think so.
Yeah. 2 members of the public offered comment. One member asked that in addressing the current collection, that the public history intent of these monuments is investigated as it relates to public art. And another member of the public urged that the indigenous people of these lands be included in this topic and that in decisions being made. Next slide. During the June 30th public meeting, as the commissioners were developing the motion, the following suggestions were also made to be presented for discussions as part of today's agenda. So if you remember, there were a couple points that you decided were not appropriate to be in the June 30th motion, but you did ask us to return to at this meeting. And that was new artwork, that there should be a call for artists for new artwork at the site and public engagement on the theme of the new work. And also a collection review and with collaboration with the city to overcome the shortcomings of our current collection processes and funding for new artworks and to support current proposals. So basically with your decision about Emancipation Group, there was acknowledgement that not only should there be a removal and a relocation of the piece, but that there should be a call for new artwork at the site and public engagement around it, and also that we need to really take seriously the shortcomings of our collection and talk about the processes and funding for new artworks to support works going forward. Okay, next slide. So I will pass it over to Mark.
Thank you, Karen. That was an extensive report, and we appreciate you and the staff, all that you're doing right now to continue on some of the conversations we've had. We'll now move on to the items in the agenda for review by the Commission, public testimony, and if needed, Commission vote. You will notice at the bottom of the screen there's instructions for public testimony, which Karen Goodfellow will briefly go over now. You're muted, Karen.
Sorry about that. You can comment in a few different ways if you're not familiar with Zoom. You can raise your hand, which is a function on the Zoom platform that you're all on now, or you can type your question into the chat box. And if you do so, we'll let you know that we hear you. If you are calling in by phone and you want to make a comment, you can press *9, and that will also let us know that you'd like to speak. And once we know that you are interested in speaking, we'll put you in a line. We're going to keep track of everybody's names who wants to speak. And when it's your turn, your name will be announced, and you will be able to speak. You can either unmute yourself or we'll unmute you. I'm not sure which function we have right now. And we'll ask that you please state your name and share your comment or question. And we'll also ask that you keep your comments to 2 minutes. And we'll wait for 2 minutes to see if anyone's interested when we move into public comment. And this just gives you a visual of what you should be looking for if you're not familiar with Zoom. So you can look for that chat box down the bottom, and you can let us know you want to speak in that way, or you could hit the participants button, and that will then show you that this raised hand, this blue hand, will come up, and if you press that, it should show next to your name, and it will let us know that you want to speak. And again, we'll lower your hand when it's your turn and let you know it's your turn to speak. But please do also share your name with everybody and keep your comments to 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Karen. In the first section, we have public art and design applications. I believe the next slide, the next item for review in this is the gratitude bridge. However, since posting the agenda for this meeting, the proponent discovered through field tests that the proposed attachment method and materials were not suitable for the site. They're also waiting on other site approvals. Therefore, we will not be reviewing this project this evening as scheduled. The proponent hopes to return in August for review and vote. So next slide. That moves us to Emancipation Group for next steps. And again, here's the text of the vote that was taken by the BAC on June 30th in regards to emancipation. So we as a commission have some items that we need to follow up. I know that Karen shared with us certain key aspects of that. Next slide. In addition to our vote, sorry, next slide. These are the two items Karen just mentioned that I think we should continue having conversations about at this meeting and determine if there's anything that we need to instruct staff to do regarding these actions and or if we need to vote on them at some point. Next slide. And what I want to do now is open it up to commission discussion first and then public testimony after the commission has a chance to weigh in to discuss the next steps with Emancipation Group, including the pending items from the June 30th motion, as well as additional items identified on June 30th but not considered in our vote. After the commission has a chance to have discussion, we'll open it up to have public comments brought forward as well to help guide our decisions. Next slide. So with that, these are the pending items for discussion that Karen presented, as well as the two additional items that we had outlined in June 30th, but had yet to vote on. And I open it up to others. Maybe Aqua, you might begin with some thoughts, and then others who want to comment on elements here.
Okay, I can't see this whole slide. It's kind of cut off on the right-hand side, so I don't know if that could be adjusted. But I guess one of the things that I wanted to start by saying that in looking at the letters that have come after the meeting and after the motion was accepted, there seems to be a great misunderstanding about our intention with removing the piece. And I feel that we should say remove and recite the piece is our intention. There's a lot of great history attached to this piece of artwork that I think these stories should be told. And I think that there's a great opportunity, as one of the visitors said, the streets of Boston are a classroom, as are its many institutions, including the ones that might house a piece like this, and really give it the spotlight, the attention, the historical context that it deserves. So I think that's important to get out there, to get that message out there that we're not melting this down and making coins out of it, that our intention is to keep this history alive, but to put it in a place where that can be done more successfully.
Thank you, Aqua. Are there other comments from commissioners? No. So I'd specifically say that in terms of the things that we promised to do in the vote, signage is in process, and we heard some comments today already on the signage. I'd like us to get it out there as quickly as possible, just so that it is interpreting the piece as best we can in its current location before it moves. And I think the staff has been working really hard to get that done. In terms of the idea of an event that would happen before it's removed, that's something where I think we need to have a subcommittee formed today that might continue to work on that. So I'm not sure if there's interested commissioners who might want to think about what kind of event we would host. And I would assume that it would have speakers with the depth of knowledge about the piece and advocates who have brought passionate views in front of us, and that we would make some sort of public event and acknowledging the deeper history that the piece holds. So are there commissioners who might be interested in being involved in something like that?
So I'll jump at once.
I'll get involved.
Camilo?
Sure, yeah.
Great. This would be a chance to work with the staff and determine what, it's not actually figuring out exactly everything, but it's sort of structuring the event and what we see as the important things to do with it.
Of course.
Thank you, Camilo.
And I think the community outreach portion could also be a part of the event outreach, is connecting with some community organizations who might be interested in supporting an event like this. So that it's not just the Art Commission doing it, but also maybe a cross section of other community organizations or institutions that want to be involved.
If you can suggest some EQUA moving forward, I mean, that would be good.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
If you can suggest some, you probably have some in mind that we can reach out to in the subcommittee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and in terms of speakers, I have some suggestions already too. There were some great speakers who've been part of our meetings already that I think could be wonderful contributors to a conversation around the piece.
I don't know if you guys remember when the some students came in to talk to us about the Frederick Douglass Memorial. Mark,
Yep.
yeah, Mark, you were there because we came at the same time. And that was a very powerful presentation that they did with their teachers. And I'm wondering if there might be a classroom that would like to be a part of this event or have a youth speaker to talk about what this means to them.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And probably we're talking about some kind of Zoom event. I'm not sure that it can be in the place itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Ekwa, you sound like you have some great ideas.
Oh, I'm willing to work. I just wanted to
not be you alone. Yeah.
I'm definitely willing to participate in events, since I think I was the person who was like, we have to have an event. We have to, you know.
How about the two of you form the subcommittee, but then you wrangle work out of the rest of us? Does that sound
good? And I think considering the fact that it's a Zoom call, I think it'll make it easier to actually put it into a national perspective. Mm-hmm. And also considering it's a copy, I think, you know, any sort of communication with the original would also be a good thing to have too.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Next up is then recontextualization. So I think we also need to garner not just broad public impact, but maybe we need to be, I know the staff has been reaching out to their connection network and has connected with museum networks, but I think all of us should be talking to colleagues and friends for ideas about where this might be relocated.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting in the letters. I don't know if other commissioners were able to read through all of the letters, but we did get some offers from people who are saying, you know, when you remove it, I'll take it. In fact, one of the people was related to like the 56th cousin of Lincoln.
Yeah.
And they were from other states, I think Oregon and other states. So there is an interest in this piece. Hopefully we'll continue to speak to Boston residents.
Yeah. I think our first order is to try to keep it in a place that's accessible to our public locally. However, if we can't find that, then we could think more nationally, but it seems like we should explore local options first. But I was struck by how many people said, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Actually,
I mean, I would take it.
I would point out one of those people was a relative descendant of Alexander's and suggested it go on his grave.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought he said it was in San Francisco, but I don't recall exactly.
I think it was St. Louis, but
St. Louis, yeah, it would make more sense.
Yeah.
Mark, did you want a subcommittee to help come up with ideas for possible sites for the statue when it comes out of storage?
Yeah, I think that would be great, or at least somebody to work, or somebody or two people to work with staff on that topic, because we'll be getting a lot of, you know, I hope we'll be getting a lot of suggestions from the public. And so it would be good if some people work with staff to kind of process that information, and then perhaps at our next meeting we can have a report back, or we can have an interim report back as necessary about where the piece might be relocated.
Yeah, I'd volunteer to work with staff in any way that I possibly can.
Okay, great, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Anyone else? We have a second with Bob?
I second myself for that as well.
Okay. Oh, two
All right.
committees.
Thank you.
Camilo, you're
The anchor.
overloaded. That's
Yeah,
great.
not really.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. And I think in those subcommittees, you should feel free to enlist the help of the full commission and also of staff in determining how to move forward with those items. Okay, so then there's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would say I'd be interested if there's any legal issues we have to be concerned about if the piece moves outside of Boston. I don't know if there's any constraints that we may have. I think those would be good to sort of understand early before we go down a path of located somewhere else.
So Karen, can we have Nyla weigh in with the subcommission on that? And I think, we're not deaccessioning the piece, so we won't be going through that process, which has a lot of legal possibilities. It strikes me that it would be a long-term loan or something like that if it isn't a city property, it could be a city property too. There could be a Boston Public Library option or something else like that, or a school or who knows what.
Yeah, I was about to ask that question if loaning it was a possibility. I have another question too about the feasibility of moving it into storage and then moving it somewhere else. Is it possible that we might think about leaving it where it is until we find a home for it and continue to use the space to educate and illuminate rather than have the expense of moving it into storage and then have the expense of moving it somewhere else? If I'm believing that we're going to find a good home for it, and just wondering how other commissioners feel about that.
I would certainly be open to that because I agree. I worry about the more we move it, the more the possibility it can be damaged or even lost. So I would be open to that suggestion.
I just
I
wanted
think
to
that
say,
goes against what our vote was. So
correct.
I think we'd have to think about the intention of our vote last time, which I think was to actually remove it and then figure out what to do with it. And so I think that there's expectation that that's what's going to happen.
Libraries and museums move slowly and usually takes about a year for things to get passed and then acted upon. So I suspect that if we do find a place for it, and I hope we do, that it might take some time. So I would be for continuing what we said, placing it in storage, and then moving it again, although I understand each time we move any work of art, there's possibility of damage.
I agree with what both Kara and Bob said. I think we heard a lot of testimony, and it's also reflected in our minutes that many people were upset with the statue in this particular location. And I think if we don't take it down as we've promised, we're not fulfilling one of the points that we said that we would do.
I agree as well.
I would also agree with that. And then, to be honest, I would be concerned if we left it there, it might be subject to damage as a result of leaving it there.
Well, then I think it's important for the report coming from the conservator, how it can be moved in a manner that it could be moved elsewhere without, does it get crated? And then can this crate then be moved to another location and another location? So I think it's going to be then critically important to know how this piece gets removed and crated or whatever to be stored so it can be moved to another place so it won't be damaged.
I would imagine it would have to get crated, absolutely.
And my understanding from the last meeting was that Karen said that the conservator is aware of all of this and was going to assess the condition as well as how to safely move it.
Yes,
Right.
and I'm wondering if the subcommittee on recontextualization can take on just a little bit more engagement with Karen and the team on the topic of its move and the legal ramifications, since they're all sort of interrelated issues. Would you guys, Camilo and Bob, be willing to do that?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So it sounds to me like we're mostly in agreement that that should be the procedure. And the subcommittee can continue to, provide information on that, working with staff once we have the information from the conservators. Okay, keep in mind that the event planners, I mean, Camilo, you're on both, so that's good. The date of removal will have to obviously be after the date for the event. So we want to make sure that those two things are organized in relationship to one another. So there's two additional items from our June 30th meeting that we had determined that we'd like to have new artwork in place of the existing work, and that we would also like to initiate a larger collection review that builds on the process from 2018, but starts to look at shortcomings across our process in this, across our collection, and this might include changes to our process, changes in funding for new artworks, and also support for current proposals. So I'm curious, in both of these, maybe we could have some comment from commissioners, maybe starting with the new artwork. Any thoughts that we want to share and actions we want to direct staff towards?
I would like to suggest that the new artwork should address some of the issues that the existing artwork attempted to address. And in particular, I'm talking about, it's clear that the Civil War in the United States was a major moment in ending the ownership of other people around the world. The British came first, and then our attempt to do that had a big impact on the world, and that should be some subject of celebration. I'm not even going to say the Emancipation Proclamation, because there was a lot of question about its historical, but the idea that human ownership of other humans ended in the United States at that time, around the world in many ways, should be addressed.
I think a lot of people had most of the anger was with the kneeling figure of Mr. Archer. I wonder if Archer himself could be part of that subject concept proposal.
I'm wondering if any of this if we're thinking of an event and we're thinking about discussion at this event, could something come out of our event that could lead to the concept or the idea for replacing this memorial?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to suggest that we consider a public process to determine what the theme of the replacement piece should be, that there is some engagement with community leadership as well as the public at large on this topic.
Another survey?
And it makes sense that maybe the event could make some of those connections, transparent through the event itself. But it seems to me, I don't know that we need an action today. I actually think we should be more careful about this process and listen to a lot of people about what we need for this site, and what's also missing in our larger collection, and also the legacy of the piece that was there. So I think there's a number of factors, and we should have a careful process going forward that that shapes an eventual RFP where we would have a call for artists. Whether it's temporary or permanent or how we want to set that up is something that I think we could continue to talk about in the next couple of meetings. But to me, it seems like we need to really initiate some community engagement over the topic as a kind of first step.
Can I clarify, would for the event, are we going to have a formal RFP ready perhaps?
I don't think we would, no. I think it would take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Karen, do you want to weigh in on that? Like with a RFP?
I'd agree that the event might be a nice way for us to get community input. We often have community meetings before we draft an RFP, and that might be a great way to do it. And I think we could also, as I mentioned, have something on the website where people can write in their ideas for the site and what the themes of the new piece could be. So we can maybe take it from a couple of different angles, and also maybe we could pursue conversation with community leaders, as you mentioned, Mark.
Yeah. So how do we initiate that? Do you need anything from us, or can staff start that?
I think we can start working on it and come back to you.
Okay.
It can be a work in progress, I guess.
Yeah.
We take things in from the website. And I just wanted to note that another recurring theme was the agency of Black Americans in their own liberation. And I think that that's an important theme that could and should be addressed. Archer Alexander certainly epitomizes that in many ways. So I like that suggestion as well.
There's a related question, which I think is a funding question as well. And that sort of gets into our next topic of area, which is collection review. We know that our collection has deficiencies at a larger scale, not just the 5 additional works and 2 potential more works that we've discussed, but there's absences of people from many communities in terms of the breadth of our artwork. So I think we should also start initiating a process to look at funding sources and our own processes, and then current proposals that are underway and how we support them. So I wanted to open it up to conversation from the commission. So the new artwork that we'd be proposing for this site would require funding, and where do we get that funding? And then beyond that, how do we start securing a more holistic collection that better represents the entire public of Boston, not just kind of the public that was in power in the 18th and 19th centuries?
Yeah, I think on that point, I think we could find funding for this project through the city, but I'm worried that if we treat this like a one-off, then we're not going to really get the kind of policy outcomes that is where some of the conversation was going at the public hearings. And so I think I would advise us and staff to pull together a memo on what we know we have known issues with the Percent for Art program and what the limitations of that are related to how we equitably represent and commission works. And we have that all in our heads, but I think pulling that together into a policy memo and exploring what it would look like to actually shift that would be great, because it's not that we don't have funds available generally through the city. It's just that the restrictions on those make it hard to do something like this. And so there's other things to unpack there, but I would love to see if we can pursue a policy response instead of just kind of trying to fundraise, whether that's through the city or externally or through grants or whatever for this specific piece.
Great. And so make it part of a larger process, you're saying, support for this piece. Are there other comments from other commissioners? That sounds very good to me, by the way. I think we all joined this commission to create new art. And so the more we can do that, the happier all of us will be in our roles.
I would add, Mark, I think we've just seen a very successful process of raising money for a artwork that was necessary, which is the Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King Embrace piece. And I think that taking that as an example, the way that was accomplished, is a good example of how we might move forward, with the idea that we're trying to do a larger, more equitable body of work than just one piece.
Yeah. I mean, I also think that the city has to be committing some to it. My understanding that's a lot of private funding, but which would be great also, George, I agree with you, more private funding would be great, but I hope we can find a way for the city to maybe deregulate its own rules and allow for existing fund lines to apply to things that we think are of value to the whole population, and then perhaps look for new funding lines. I don't know if that's possible, but Kara, that would be great if you guys could create a memo and share that with us at the next meeting.
Yeah, and I think part of that could include like a little bit of the funding ecosystem, because it's not just our funding source that is problematic when it comes to supporting projects, right? It's that there aren't many others out there for Boston, at least, or greater Boston, and those also are very restrictive and have like a very specific thing that they do. So yeah, I think we can pull that together for the next meeting.
Great. You don't need a vote from us on anything, do you, Kara, at this point?
No, I don't think so, Rick.
No.
So all of what we're doing today is directing staff or subcommittees to move forward. We don't need votes, but I've heard consensus on all of these issues for the pending items and the additional items. Okay. Any other comments from commissioners before we open it up to any public comments? Okay, thank you, commissioners. Aqua and I will now, I think, are we moving forward here? Let's just see. I think we just need to move to this slide where we, the next slide, yeah, thank you, there. So Aqua and I, we'll open up to conversations and testimonies by members of the public who'd like to comment on the work or the discussion that we've had on any of the topics that we've been discussing related to the Emancipation Group and or some of the initiatives that we're beginning. So we welcome your comments. I'm not quite sure, how are we going to call on individual members of the public?
So we have that same list. We have a Google document that we can share with you where we've been tracking people. I think Sarah is going to share that with you.
Great.
And so for those of you waiting to speak, we are going to, you'll be able to see here the order of scheduled speakers. And so we'll let you know when it's your turn.
And just as a reminder, we're asking you to limit your testimony to 2 minutes. So the first speaker on our list has the last 4 phone numbers of 2781. We're not sure. If you could state your name, please, if that sounds like your phone number. Unmute yourself, state your name, and then you can begin your 2 minutes testimony.
I think, okay, my name is Arun Rashid. And
actually, is your computer on as well?
Oh, I see what's going on. Yes.
There we go.
Yes,
Okay.
my name is Arun Rashid.
Okay, you can begin your testimony now.
My name is Arun Rashid. I'm the president and founder of the Friends of Crispus Addicts in Boston. And so I listened to what we're talking about 100% with everything you're doing and where you're going with. I just want to remind, as I did since 2018, about this initiative to have a statue of Crispus Addicts in the city of Boston. The place where he got international recognition, that Abraham Lincoln respected, and all others who followed in the area of independence, freedom, human rights. All that being said, we'd like to see how we can look at the city officials who deal with arts, public arts, can treat this as it's an important issue, because trust me, around the country, people ask that question to me. I'm the former president of Friends of the Sable in the city of Chicago. When I came back here to Boston, the first thing they asked me in Chicago was, is this something that they're doing or have an interest in the city of Boston, recognizing this man? So that being said, I would hope that we can have a discussion on how, if we're going to take down something that we think is insulting, to put some time in the city of Boston that is insulting, that hasn't happened yet, or the first to defy and the first to die for human rights, Crispus Addicts.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your comments. And I believe your organization may have written us a letter as well. I remember reading that. So thank you for your input. And I think this will be an ongoing discussion. So we welcome you continuing to weigh in on the survey that Karen shared earlier. Okay, next.
Okay.
Matawin M. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
That's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, but very faintly.
Monroe, and I'm co-leader of United American Indians of New England, and also the lead organizer of the statewide Indigenous Peoples Day campaign. We wanted to thank the Commission for acting on the Emancipation Monument and say that we stand in solidarity with our Black relatives in all their efforts to bring down monuments to white supremacy in Boston and elsewhere. For decades, we have opposed the Columbus statue at the waterfront park. This statue was brought in and the park was named without a proper public process, and we have documentation and testimony to that effect. When we march for Indigenous Peoples Day in Boston and for other things, we always go to that park to talk about the water there, because to us, water is life. And we also talk every time about how the statue must come down. Publicly displayed Columbus statues have been coming down all over the US and all over the world. Public celebrations of Columbus mean celebrating the genocide and enslavement of Indigenous peoples that began when Columbus and his men arrived as uninvited invaders in 1492. Continuing to display and celebrate Columbus in this public place and continuing to deny the authentic history of what happened causes damage and pain to Indigenous people. It's unfortunate that some elected officials are choosing to defend the false legacy of Columbus and seek the return of this statue, and that some private boards are doing the same. So because of the pain and damage that has been ongoing for decades as a result of this statue, we are asking that the BAC schedule a special meeting in order to talk about this statue, with the hope that the BAC will vote to bring it down permanently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I believe you have been in touch already with our staff, and they made us aware of the potential for a listening session with the commission. And so they will follow. Karen, you guys will follow up with?
Yes, we will.
Okay, great. So we'll establish a listening session and then a larger process to discuss that and other sculptures as well. So thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, Ina Fox.
Hello. First, I just really want to thank the Boston Arts Commission just for this whole process of, you know, the conversation, the public testimony around this. I think it's been very good and very thought-provoking. So my comments really are about thinking a little bit differently about recontextualizing and finding a new site. I wrote my comments before today's meeting, so I hope they'll still be relevant and be considered. So I'm going to read my statement. I agree that the Emancipation Group statue should be removed, as I believe that keeping it in the public square reinforces racist narratives about our history, perpetuating such beliefs as the great white savior and that Black people had or have no agency in our own liberation. However, I also think this is an important moment to continue the dialogue around public monuments and racism. Removing the monument without a clear plan simply means it will stay in storage indefinitely, out of sight, out of mind. What I would like the Boston Arts Commission to do is set a reasonable date for the removal of the Emancipation Group. Let's say a year from now. I don't really know what the time frame would be, and outline a clear plan and schedule for signage, interventions, public conversations, interpretive tours, etc., that will take place between now and the time the statue is removed. Preferably, many of these will take place at or near the site. The other thing I would like the BAC to consider is really have to be able to identify before the statue is removed a relocation site for the statue where its history can be shared, its presence, and opportunity for ongoing education. Is there a museum in Boston that would realistically take the statue? Is there a nonprofit or public institution with an adequate venue and resources? Is this even a realistic prospect? And so when the working group has finished its investigation and publicly shared its findings, it would be good, then the public will know realistically if the statue will remain in storage indefinitely or has an alternate home. My third and final thought, which I actually stole or borrowed from someone in conversation on this, is connected to public dialogue. It's about an intervention in which the Emancipation Group could be covered in situ for a period of time, such as, think it's wrapping a la Cristo, or some kind of scaffolding structure, etc. And this would be another kind of visual provocation to dialogue and structured conversations, and perhaps have structured conversations accompany that. So those are just my thoughts on really having the public conversation, having a limited time that the statute stays in place, and having these public conversations continue while the statute is there. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And as you saw, we created 2 subcommittees that would be relevant to your work, and maybe they'll be reaching out to you, or if you could share your information with staff, we might be able to make a connection so that your ideas can be thought. We could probably use some help.
Okay, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm going to let Aqua Holmes take over for the next 3. You're on mute still, Aqua.
I was going to allow you to introduce Byron Rushing because I know you've been hearing, but I'm happy to do it. Byron, are you there?
And now, yes, can you hear me?
Okay, Byron, yes, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks. The first question is, does everybody know what's behind me? What's my virtual background? just a test. Okay, I want to say 2 things, right? The first thing is, I really am, as I understand it, the whole discussion of recontextualization is one of the items that will happen before the statute moves. That's how I read the motion that you adopted. So I really think it's how it is essential that the committee that is working on that give the public, and with the public's involvement, a plan for that soon. And I really don't think we should move the statute until we have that. And I think, and so that gets to my next point. Right now, we all know that this has been a pretty unique time of public discussion about a particular history. I don't think any of us can remember a time when so many Bostonians were engaged in a discussion about the meaning of a monument, even the 54th. And I think we don't want to slow that down. I think we want to continue that discussion in as vibrant a way as possible. One of the ways to do that, of course, is to talk about the statute where it is right now. So what kind of interaction does anybody from now on have with the statute? So far, the plan of having a 2-dimensional description of the statute is really pretty old-fashioned. And I really think that you need to talk about in some kind of augmented reality, some kind of virtual, connected to our devices way of describing this place, that place in Park Square right now. So I think how we describe this, and then how we go on to get as many people to stay engaged in this and clean up a lot of the misunderstandings and dead up wrongness that has been stated, as well as all the good history that has been stated, is one of your responsibilities. I would like to suggest one quick thing that has not been discussed to my knowledge, and that is to cover it up. I think you should just box up the statue where it is right now. And one of the things that will give you a lot more space to describe what is underneath that box and why that box is there. It'll also save you a few dollars on storage fees. But anything to engage people in that space more than they are it presently looks like they're going to be engaged. And so my suggestion at this point is a serious retextualization plan, that plan be, it doesn't have, it has to be that the plan is in place before anything is done to the statue. Doesn't mean that the statue has to move to that place the next day, but we should know where it is going to go. And my second point is that you don't need to put it in storage, and you can cover it up where it is right now, and that gets to deal with the immediate, overwhelming concern that I heard about the imagery itself and passing that imagery without any other information. So those are my two suggestions.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Warren Manigault. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for allowing me to have a comment. Appreciate giving me an opportunity.
Yes.
My name is Warren Manigault. I am the senior pastor of Holy Tabernacle Church out of Brockton, Mass. Born and raised in Boston. I had to comment on this issue of the Emancipation Group. I did send a letter into you. Hopefully you guys had a chance to look at it. Just two comments. One, that I'm against moving it, as I said in my letter. I don't understand how the people who built this saw freedom, and today we see subjugation. I don't understand how the people who had chains, the people who had been whipped, people who had been subject to one of the horrors of our history, built this as a memorial to their freedom, but somehow now we think it's unfit for public consumption. That troubles me greatly. Are we saying that they were wrong? Are we saying that they were too ignorant? We're making a statement here that I think is not one that they would approve of. In fact, I said in my letter, I think we're silencing the voices of those that commissioned the original statue, the original monument, and also the copy that's brought to Boston. I've seen this thing many, many times in my growing up in Roxbury, and I gotta tell you that I never saw subjugation, I always saw freedom. And for us to now revise history under the guise of racial harmony and sensitivity, I think it is a wrong move, and I'm actually ashamed that we're doing this. Lastly, I think Boston has a great history of being involved in the abolitionist movement, and rather than running away from our history and recontextualizing our history, history is the history. It was what it was, it is what it is, and what we should do is encourage people to understand it so they can be better as a result of it. Erasing the history, recontextualizing the history doesn't make it go away. So thank you for giving me the time to comment on this, and I really would urge you to reconsider, rethink what we're doing, but thank you for the time.
Thank you, Warren. And there's some wonderful information on the Boston website, the Boston Arts and Culture website about the history of the piece. I would encourage you to read that, as well as many other articles that were written on it and who actually was involved in the design of the monument. So I'm gonna move on to Heather Lavelle. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Heather, are you here?
I am, I'm right here. Thank you, that's correct, Lavelle. This is about the Columbus Monument. I'm co-founder of the Massachusetts-based group Italian Americans for Indigenous Peoples Day. And Italian Americans for Indigenous Peoples Day stands in solidarity with thousands of Indigenous people from many tribal nations who live in the Boston area who oppose the return of the Columbus statue. We too oppose the return of the Columbus statue, and we support the renaming of the park. And we also support the request of the Massachusetts Indigenous Peoples Day campaign for a special hearing on the statue in August. As you've heard from Matoi, the Indigenous leaders have been trying for years to engage officials in conversations about this issue, and we just ask that you honor their request for a hearing. And that's all I have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. Mark?
Okay, thank you, Heather. And I think we'll continue to try to make that connection between staff and the commission with the members that you mentioned. Next up, we have Eric Wilson.
Hi, my name's Eric Wilson. First of all, thanks to the board and the staff for your hard work here and for making this process transparent and virtual. I'm calling from Lexington, Virginia, where I serve as executive director of the Rockbridge Historical Society and Museum. And I do so because Rockbridge County is the birthplace of Archer Alexander, and he spent his first 20 years here in Virginia enslaved before being taken to Missouri. You all look to have a good process to work this through, I'm glad to say, as a museum professional, and whatever sites, whatever stands, whatever interpretive strategies you pursue, I would encourage you to engage descendant families, whether that of Mr. Alexander. It sounds like you've been contacted by a descendant of Mr. Lincoln. And to use those as resources, as well as other kinds of descendant connections in the Boston area. I'm a former Boston resident, so this is a nice double tie for me. Some of those connections may not be the obvious ones in this circumstance, but I do think they're integrated in important ways. I think they would also help connect the Emancipation Group to other places and parts of American history, Virginia, Missouri, Boston, Illinois, in ways that could allow you some interpretive traction to develop and to share that story in different ways. I also serve as Director for History Museums on the Virginia Association of Museums Board, so I've worked with a number of these types of issues in communities across Virginia. Certainly in Lexington, Virginia, we're very live at the moment with questions about monuments and memorialization related to Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, George Washington. The memorial here and in Washington, D.C. Provide an important and fascinating and very relevant group to think through. But again, I would just say that to the extent that other resources can be developed and used from afar, I hope that as we reach out to you or as you can find them, that may play a role. I particularly think in things I'm hearing about a pre-removal event, or I assume there would be something in reinstallation, whether that were at a museum, outside, virtually. I think there are a lot of different ways to knit this story that also takes that object beyond its singularity. It has powerful and singular stories, but to the extent that monuments can be integrated, not only across an immediate commemorative landscape, but a range of histories and communities across the country, and as some of the other commenters have said, across the globe. This is a great opportunity for Boston. I'm glad you're hearing a lot of different voices. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'd encourage you to maybe get in touch with our staff if you haven't done so already. There may be some documentation you could share with us that would be of value.
We will. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, next up, Jay Victor. Jay Victor, are you still on the call?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just unmute yourself and then you have 2 minutes to talk.
I believe I'm unmuted. Okay. All right. I have 2 minutes for the minute I can tell it. I sent a letter, I put in the text that I did send in some information regarding
I'm sorry, we're having trouble hearing you.
I sent in information regarding some of the historical research I've done over the last couple of years. I have a tourist trail that I put together. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a 19th century history tourist trail that I put together. I've already spoken with you guys in the past about it and some other things, as well as Byron Rushing. I spoke about Byron Rushing, so, and as well as at universities, I've been holding different things. I'm all over the city. Venues, libraries, art and film institutions, and Brookline, everywhere. So I'm just trying to have an impact and change the course of history of Boston, because we know Boston has racial problems. So my generation, it came up during the Civil Rights generation. So I've lived with this burden all my life. And what I'm trying to do is rectify the situation by making the type of proposals that create change in the city of Boston. So always not being labeled as one of the most racist places in the United States. decade after decade. So what I did was I have a brochure and proposal that I've distributed to most leaders around the city of Boston. If you haven't heard of it yet, I sent it to you in the email. I'm not going to go on and put it out there because I should be included in most of these meetings and so-called community leaders that are doing things. But the leaders have to be appropriately according to the task at hand. If you're doing historical urban projects, then you should bring in urban professionals involved in planning, designing, and developing the city. So you have the appropriate so-called professionals. So if that's what you're doing with this statute, you don't just bring in any artists. I know people that call because they take stuff all the time. You have to bring in the proper people according to the facts of what they're doing and what they're participating in, what they're doing. So the memorial is connected to the trail that I have. And it's not a Black History trail. It's a trail that's in black and white. Also, the fellow that has the issue with the Senior Hall, that is also saying something about Crystal Status now. Now, my trail includes Senior Hall, the whole city of Boston. I broadcast stuff on.
I just want to interrupt you. You've used up your time. If you could wrap up, but Faneuil Hall's not in our purview anyway.
I'm just saying my trail, the whole history of Boston, and it includes the Lincoln Emancipation site. So that's basically could be the culmination of the impact of the trails that I have, which is going to bring money and tourism to Boston and change the perspective that people have around the city. Boston is the most racist city. So the potential that I'm putting forward is astounding. So that's what I've been doing. I do that all my life. I'm a talented person. And when you're a young person, you learn that you're young, gifted, and Black. And then hopefully you're not shoved off the bus or shoved out because you're Black in Boston.
Okay, so well, thank you for your comment. And can I recommend one thing, that you send us the information? I think you said you've already sent us a letter, but maybe the information you have, you could forward to us if you have some documentary information, and we'd love to see that.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Aqua, I think you're next. Am I right or no? Do I have one more?
Yeah, you have one more.
Okay, Greg Gaylor, who I know. You're next up on the call.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'm Greg Gaylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Preservation Alliance. I first want to thank the Commission and the staff for managing a thoughtful and inclusive dialogue on what's obviously a challenging subject, and this piece in particular, and for working hard to consider divergent opinions. I support the idea of including community members and organizations to determine next steps. I think that's critical. But I also, want to reinforce some concerns about placing this in storage. I think, moving it is important. We all agree that needs to happen, but we all know the danger of things going into warehouses, particularly municipal warehouses, and seeing what happens. So I think it's important that this engaging discussion continues, that the Commission make sure that it stays on the agenda and we stay on top of it. I also want to agree with Representative Rushing's comment about its unique time we're in, that the public has a unique appetite that we've never seen before to talk about these challenging topics, and we really shouldn't waste this energy and should figure out how to continue this discussion collectively. But what I really wanted to mention was the fact that we know this won't be the last time we tackle this challenge. You already mentioned other artwork, place names, which I recognize are not necessarily the purview of this Commission, but other memorials, how we're going to deal with these subjects and not deal with this one as a one-off, about changing, removing, contextualizing, providing the information and history people need, and using these as teaching opportunities. So as much as I like the idea of a subcommittee on contextualizing and using and moving this particular sculpture, what's going to happen with the next one? How do we look at this as more of a process and not a one-off? Will the subcommittee of this board have the staying power? Because we really want a consistent group of people that considers precedent in the broader context, and that these individual decisions really add up to a broader collective decision for Boston. And it's not just about artwork, and I think that's where the challenge lies. And how does this lead to some policy decisions? I know that was mentioned under the sort of context of budget, but I think the policy of how these things happen, these changes of names and relocation, really needs to be thought of more contextually. I think we made a good, and you guys did a great job on this one, but we know there'll be more. And finally, I just want to say it's really important that public voices be included. I think we heard in previous testimony on this sculpture how powerful and informative and impactful those public voices are. And they really need to be part of whatever subcommittee is formed, either of this group to supplement commission members or a larger commission that deals with the broader issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And I would recommend that we would love to engage with you in terms of the public education process. You're an organization that's very involved in that. We're not necessarily an education institution. We're a public body, but we'd love to have partnerships with groups like yours to do things like site tours or visits with historians or other kinds of things before the piece comes down. So I hope you'll be open to that.
Yes, the preservation would be happy to continue the dialogue with the commission and the staff and help whenever we can.
Great, thank you. And Aqua, you can take the last one, right?
Last speaker for the evening is Pierre Belanger. Hope I pronounced that.
That's good. That's correct. There's a lot of different ways to pronounce that. Thank you, Equa and the committee. I just wanted to take a very short period of time to both echo, but also extend a call for a hearing regarding the Columbus Monument for a couple of reasons. I appreciate the time that's dedicated to a number of different monuments and the whole scale of it, given the current moment. But I'd just like to go on record to mention that the 2018 report by Eva Matichik, if I have that correct, the historical information that is being considered is not only vastly incomplete and inaccurate, but it contains a number of errors and omissions that, based on the research that that we've been doing, a research organization, we've amassed approximately 1,000 pages of public documents that have never been published that actually demonstrate a grievous corruption of public process and vast amounts of time that are dedicated to a statue and the renaming, to a statue that was never approved, and the renaming of a park that was originally intended to serve the multiculturalism of the city at a period of heightened federally mandated desegregation, which is a larger context that's important to consider as part of the committee, knowing that this statue specifically was also brought forth through funding by the Knights of Columbus, who, as you may know, have funded not just dozens, but hundreds of other monuments to Columbus across the country. I would just like to ask and request to the committee that there is time dedicated specifically to this monument, and enough time is dedicated to be able to bring to light this information in order to properly assess its future, understanding that its context and its history and the decisions that are made by this committee that are going to the mayor are taken in consideration of not a local context, but a national and international one across the Americas, through which the Knights of Columbus have a record of essentially funding across a very, very large space of this continent. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre. I had no idea. I'd be interested in reading a report from some of that information that you mentioned. Just a few more minutes. If there's anyone else out there that would like to raise their hand, I think we have a few more minutes. And if not, Mark, do you want to wrap up?
Sure. I mean, I think what we're hearing is really helpful information, and we hope that we can rely on all of you who have given us some testimony here and some thoughts to continue the conversation with us, and also to provide us with materials and information that you may have, or links to institutions or ideas or whatever it is. We really will benefit from a larger discussion about what to do with Emancipation Group, how to better educate the public about its history, and also moving into processes for other sculptures. So I think we have already acted in instructing staff with Columbus to begin a process of engagement and to have a listening session. And we may more clearly define a process for review of that in our next meeting after having a listening session in the future. I would say our listening session, Karen, maybe you could weigh in, our listening session would likely be in our next meeting, correct?
I think, you know, it sounds like we might need to check in with some other folks who might want to weigh in on their availability, but I think we can expect it to be at the August 11th one, and if not, then we would promote and share with folks if we were going to do it at a special meeting.
Okay, and that would be the start of a conversation with the public, as well as a review by the commission itself. So nothing like a vote would happen anywhere near there. We'd have a deliberative process with, again, more hearings, surveys, that sort of thing that would follow it.
That sounds good.
Okay.
All right, so I think we've completed. I don't know if there's any other commissioner comments who want to follow up before we move to a motion to adjourn. It doesn't seem that we have any pressing issue to vote on right now. We have a lot of issues, but they're all for staff work and to come back to us at the next meeting.
I only feel the need to just respond to a challenge by Byron Rushing about his background and thank him for calling into us from Istanbul.
I want to
you just wanted to brag.
I want to just lift up some of the comments that we've heard around being a little bit more creative with what the programming is related to Emancipation Group. And I think also, even though we have all the testimony that's public and we have the hearings recorded, I wonder if there's a more programmatic way that we can kind of capture almost like maybe in an oral history kind of format, some of the reactions and thoughts and perspectives from folks on the memorial itself. I don't know. I'm just thinking, I feel like we got some good suggestions today about like how we can more creatively engage with it and make sure that people are learning and hearing that, and that we're presenting that information in a way that's not like bureaucratic and difficult to find, like public testimony in a hearing, but maybe in a way that's more proactive and educational.
Okay, any other comments? All right, then do I have a motion to adjourn? First, I should say thank you to everybody who participated today. It's been really helpful to us to learn more about where we can go forward with this, with the motion that we made in our last meeting. So, motion to adjourn, anyone?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, George. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That seems like enough ayes. All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. And a special thanks to staff for all the work. I know that you've been doing quite a lot of heavy lifting in the last few weeks around this topic, and we expect you'll continue to be doing some heavy lifting, but all of us on the commission really appreciate it. I know you have the public interest in mind with everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Aye.